Hello, I'm Jerry Scheidbach, pastor at the Lighthouse and your brain masseur. You know, America is fast moving toward a state of war in our streets. A lot of pressures are building up in our culture that are beginning to break out in aggressive and violent behavior. I'm sure you've noticed that. Remember when Charlton Heston said, "You can have my gun when you can pry it from my cold, dead hand." Oh, you don't remember Charlton Heston? Come on. He's Moses, man. The Ten Commandments, filmed right out here in Guadalupe, a nearby beach. Also, I remember when Heston said in a speech that America was engaged in a war, and he called it a culture war. And it was the first time I heard that expression used. I thought it was quite insightful and looked into it, and of course it had been bantered about quite a bit up till then. Anyway, a new Black Panthers leader has declared that Milwaukee is at war, or that the Milwaukee riot is a war. Now, he went out of his way to say it's not a civil war. And this. He said it's a war against blacks. August 13, Officer DominiqueHeaggan-Brown shot and killed Sylville K. Smith. Both men are Black Americans. Brown had joined the police force in 2010. Sylville, he took a different path in life, and as an ex-convict, having been imprisoned a number of times, was arrested for charges like robbery, carrying a concealed weapon without a permit, theft, heroin possession, and several other crimes. Well, Officer Brown was wearing a body camera, and the video received from that camera shows that, as a matter of fact, Sylville had turned and aimed a gun at the officer before the officer shot him and killed him. Now, riots broke out between 8 and 9 p.m., only a few hours after the shooting. The word got around quickly. A group of around 100 black protesters gathered near the scene and, quote, confronted a line of 20 to 30 officers. In quote, it turned violent. And according to Chief Edward Flynn, members of the Revolutionary Communist Party were responsible for instigating the violence. And we know that the Revolutionary Communist Party had a presence there. They themselves admitted that they had come to Milwaukee, and in their words, to support a revolution. But they offered, "We didn't intend to incite any violence." Really. Now, Smith has two sisters. One is named Kimberly, and she urged protesters that violence is not the answer. Stop the violence. His other sister, Sherelle, encouraged the protesters to take their riot into suburban neighborhoods and burn them down. How about some background to this whole thing so we can get a better perspective on it? In 2014, protesters in Milwaukee went to the streets after the fatal shooting of a mentally ill black man named Dontre Hamilton. You might remember that case. In the confrontation between the officer and Hamilton managed to get control of the police officer's baton and struck him on the neck and began coming at him. Hamilton, backing up, drew his weapon, commanded or ordered Hamilton to drop the baton and stop his advance. However, Hamilton continued to advance on the officer. The officer shot at him. Hamilton continued to advance on him. The officer shot again a few more times. Hamilton kept on coming at him, and the insinuation of the report is that this man was under some kind of influence of drugs or whatever. In any event, he ended up shooting this man 14 times and killing him. It was ruled self-defense. However, the officer was fired from his position because he failed to follow appropriate protocols in approaching the Mr. Hamilton in the first place, and that led to this incident. And then earlier in 2010 and 2011, two other incidents involving the deaths of black suspects while in police custody stirred significant unrest. And then adding to that, a scandal involving police illegally strip searching 74 black Americans that was settled by the city for $5 million, and the officers involved were punished. One reporter asked a lady, Charlene Moore, what she thought about the recent riots in Milwaukee. And she said this, quote, "It's a series of things that has happened over a period of time. And right now, you shake a soda bottle and you open the top and it explodes. And this is what it is," end quote. Shaking the soda. Who's shaking the soda bottle? Illegally searching 74 black Americans certainly doesn't help. However, in that case, remember, justice did prevail. The system worked, and those officers were punished, and the city settled for $1 million. But what about the Americans, black and white, who justify snipers killing police officers, as happened recently in Orlando, because of this supposed war on blacks? Shaking the soda bottle? What about Obama going into the Rose Garden to make a statement about what finally was proved to be the self-defense killing of Trayvon Martin, elevating that terrible incident to the level of a national issue? One man, a black man, by the way, asked with regard to that, quote, "How many white murders has Obama made a Rose Garden statement about," end quote. Good question. Shaking the soda bottle. When Black University professor Lewis Gates, you might remember, was arrested, before the facts were all known, Obama made a public statement that the arresting officer acted stupidly, interjecting himself in that matter before all the facts were known. He insinuated it was race-related. Turned out that Gates had forgotten his keys, was trying to break into his own house. A neighbor didn't recognize him, called it in, the police came, and because they thought it was a burglary. And when Gates stubbornly refused to provide identification to prove who he was taken into custody. Well, what else was the officer supposed to do? Shaking the soda bottle. When Michael Brown assaulted a police officer and was shot and killed by that officer, before the facts were in, Obama went with the rumor that Brown was shot with his hands up. You know, hands up, don't shoot. Turned out to be a total lie. An absolute fabrication that some continue to run with. But not before Obama went public with his own comments saying that the killing of Brown put stains, or that it stains the hearts of black children, quote unquote. What? Shaking the soda bottle. When Freddie Gray was killed while in the police custody of black officers who reported to a black chief officer or police chief in a city that is, by the way, run by a black mayor. Before the ink had dried on the police reports of that incident, Obama went to work with a public statement as President of the United States. Quote, "This is not new, and we shouldn't pretend it is new. There are problems and challenges when it comes to how policing and how our laws are applied in certain communities, and we have to pay attention to it," end quote. Now, it's easy to hear the insinuation in that statement that policing it applies laws unevenly and unfairly when it comes to black people. Shaking the soda bottle. More recently, after the fatal shooting of two black men in separate incidents in Minnesota and Louisiana, again, before the justice system had a chance to get its wheels turning, Obama went to Twitter and, shaking the soda bottle with all of his might, he said, quote, "These fatal shootings are not isolated incidents. They are symptomatic of the broader challenges within our criminal justice system, the racial disparities that appear across the system year after year," end quote. And you can hear the shaking of the soda bottle in that rhetoric, just, putting fuel on the fires of racial tensions. Now listen to this. New Black Panther leader Babu Omowale, self-described Minister of Defense for the People's New Black Panther Party, asked about his view of the Milwaukee riots, said, quote, "This is oppressed people fighting against a racist, white, supremacist police system," end quote. It's hard to imagine a more biased statement than something like that. He goes on to explain the riots in Milwaukee as, quote, "people lashing out and fighting against the system," end quote. He justified the riots as an exercise of the rights recognized in the Second Amendment. He says, and I quote, "As it is said in the Second Amendment, you know, so this is not new. The people in this country have always defended themselves against tyranny," end quote. Wow. Even after Babu was told what happened, when it was explained to him that this 23-year-old Milwaukee man with a lengthy arrest record, including robbery and concealed carry without permit, had turned on the officer with the gun in his hand. Well, Babu dismissed it, saying, quote, "You're only telling me the police officer's version. See, the other man is dead. He can't give his version," end quote. What do you do with this sort of thinking? This kind of, well, prejudice. We're fast approaching an impasse. Forces at work in this country are driving us into deeper and deeper conflict, and it's breaking out. The soda bottle keeps getting agitated. Liberal politicians are shaking it as hard as they can, and it's going to blow. And here's my point. Liberal policies in this country are agitating unrest. Now, you can blame Trump for pointing it out, or you can blame the leftist policies that have actually created the problem. Progressive Communist Party politics in this country are exacerbating race problems and racial tensions, agitating whites and blacks, browns, whatever. I mean, I'm sure Saul Alinsky must be dancing in his grave, rejoicing over how effective his plan to overwhelm the system until it implodes on itself. You know, we look at education, our way of life, our values, our culture, attacked constantly, ridiculed, marginalized. I mean, we feel like the academic culture in this country has declared war on our values and on our beliefs and on our, well, on our lives, really. And that they have an agenda to separate our children from us and us from our children. We look at science, and again, we're inundated with a barrage of questionable science that targets, interestingly, our way of life and our fundamental beliefs and worldview as Christians in this country. And it began with this evolution hoax. It began with the hoax of evolution, and it continues today with bogus global schwarming. And I mean, we're told, don't drink coffee, don't eat this, don't eat that, go ahead and eat this, go ahead and eat things, back and forth all the time. Science has virtually just compromised its credibility to the point where it's hardly even considered as having any integrity today. And we're at a point where we don't trust education and we don't trust science anymore. Now you need to think about the significance of that. We have a culture that basically distrusts the education system and the scientific community. Two institutions or two areas of our society that before were held in really high and great esteem. We look at the churches, ordaining homosexuals, betraying their head, Jesus Christ, rejecting his word, and all to win a place at Jezebel's table, to go along with political correctness in order to gain the approval of the world. The pastors have betrayed us. They've joined the other side. I mean, even churches are denying the Bible, reinforcing the message of science and education, caving in. And we look at the media. It's all biased, polarized between right and left, lying to us. I mean, proven cases where media has outright lied to the public. The bias against our way of life, our values, our beliefs, our culture is galling and incessant, and it never lets up. We look at politics. Being lied to is expected. Being betrayed, commonplace. And now we're hearing elected politicians say things right out loud like they admire Ho Chi Minh. We hear them openly criticize the Constitution. Some of our cherished rights that are acknowledged in the Constitution, well, we hear them saying things that clearly indicate they don't share our belief that those rights are, in fact, ours and inalienable. They talk about subordinating American citizens to some world court. They talk about compromising the sovereignty of this nation to some UN charter. And all of these things are building pressure. All of this stuff is shaking the soda bottle. And we're hearing this day after day after day. Americans are becoming increasingly agitated from pressures within And then pressures from without. I can make a long list there. The situation developing with China, the situation developing with ISIS, and all of these things that are going on. It's exactly as Miss Moore said. If you shake a soda bottle and then open the lid, it's going to explode. You know, we've been engaged in a culture war in this country for several decades now, but that war is beginning to spill out and beginning to become open war in our streets. We had better get fully engaged in the spiritual side of this conflict. Ephesians 6:10-20 teaches us, who are Christians, that our wrestling, our warfare, is not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. It's the spiritual side of this whole thing where you find the fountain of all of this coming into our culture, as we have turned away from the Word of God and the way of God, and therefore opened the door to all of these other influences to come in and take our country, as the Bible says, take our country to hell. So we must engage the spiritual enemy that is behind all of this, and that takes serious prayer. And according to Jesus, some devils cannot be managed except by prayer and fasting. So what is the answer? Well, I'll tell you what it is. We must return to the old paths, where is the good way, and walk in that. And that's Jeremiah 6, verse 16, the theme verse of the Lighthouse Baptist Church. God has exalted, that is, he has magnified his word above his name. His word says in Psalm 9:17 that the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. Now the world will mock this one nation under God, already does. Mocks the Christian faith. In truth, there's not another nation identified with the Christian faith quite so closely as America is, certainly as America has been. And the enemy knows that if he can provoke God to drop this nation into hell, well, many will take it as a triumph over God, as it were, or a kind of victory over Christianity. And that's what they're looking for. I've actually heard Christians say or use this as an argument why they believe God would never turn his back on America, as it were, or drop her into hell, as the Bible says that he will do, or do to America what he did to Israel so long ago and turn her over to some heathen nation for judgment, which is, of course, ridiculous. Well, first of all, God is not the one losing here, my friend. We are. And the truth is, all nations will come under the rod of God's Son soon enough. But God has magnified his word above his name. And that means he'll keep his word in spite of his name. He'll keep his word even if it brings reproach upon his name. And God said that he would turn a nation to hell that has forgotten him. I'm calling on all God-fearing patriots to join me in a season of prayer and fasting. And we're going to pray for this country, and we're going to do what we can in prayer and fasting to bring down the strongholds Satan has set up in our country, holding this territory spiritually, so that we can do, so that, if you notice, no matter what we do on the physical side of this thing, it seems to make no difference. Everything keeps moving the same direction. That's because we're not addressing the spiritual powers behind all of this. Now, if you want insight into the role that prayer and fasting has in engaging the spiritual side of this conflict, and why that is necessary before you can do anything in the physical arena, as Jesus said, you bind the strong man, then spoil the house. Then you can go to our bookstore, books@dbp.com. Now, books at is not that little symbol for at, but it's the letters AT. So books@dbp.com, and you can order my book, Kingdom Power by Prayer and Fasting. Some tips and some insights on how to fast effectively and avoid health issues and things like that, although you should always speak to your doctor before you go into a extended fast, of course. But we need to engage the enemy in the spiritual realm before we can hope to be effective engaging the enemies, the children of disobedience, in the physical realm. Now, thank you for listening. I appreciate you tuning in and listening to this message. I would appreciate it if you would give me a like or a don't like and give me some comments. I appreciate that. Now, we've launched a new Brain Massage Show website, and you just go to brainmassage.net. We used to use thebrainmassageshow.com, and you can still use that. But now you can just write brainmassage.net. It'll take you to our new website, and I think you'll find it to be very, very interesting. And God bless you, and God save America, and I'll see you in church.